Let's talk about hip impingement lessons from shoulder impingement. There's this thing that I noticed that I'm calling fear of the unknown when it comes to hip impingement. And it happens because people go to an expert, a doctor, someone wearing a white coat, and the doctor tells them, you have bony problems that can't be fixed without surgery. And when a doctor says that to you, or you see it on an x-ray or an MRI, it seems definitive, it seems conclusive. But if we step back and think through it a little bit, there are bony abnormalities in the shoulder which cause shoulder impingement, but surgery is not always the one and only option for it. So what are the lessons that we can take from shoulder impingement that we can apply to the hip? Well, the main lesson is, let's go over a little diagram first. So this is a shoulder, a scapula. This is your acromion process, and you can have a type 1, 2, or 3 acromion. A type 3 is typically referred to as a hooked acromion, which means that it kind of comes over the top here too much, and any ligaments or tendons that are running through here, your rotator cuff and stuff like that, can get impinged on that hooked acromion and cause you pain and get a rotator cuff tear, which is kind of like a labral tear in the hip. Now, in the hip, you can have a similar situation where you have a pincher lesion or a pincher impingement where some of the bone of the acetabulum is hooking over the femur too much and causing it to impinge when you try to go up into hip flexion, or if you try to go up into shoulder flexion, you get this impingement right here, or you get this impingement right here. And both bony abnormalities, but in the shoulder, often what's recommended is to train your scapula to not be so forwardly tilted, to train scapular retraction and a posterior pelvic tilt, which automatically gives you more shoulder clearance, as opposed to if your scapula is forwardly tilted, I've got impingement right there, I feel impinged. But with a little motor control, learning how to be in a better position, all of a sudden you've solved the impingement just by getting a better positioning. Same thing in the hip. If your hip is anteriorly tilted, you're going to get hip impingement a lot earlier. We talk about that in the FAI Fix and the soon-to-be-released FAI Fix for athletes about how pelvic positioning radically affects and impacts when you're going to impinge in the hip. So besides just getting in a better position by using your brain to put yourself in a better position, that's not the end-all be-all solution. You also have to free the front and educate the back. Meaning, if you have shoulder impingement, your pecs and anterior deltoids are pulling you forward and you'll impinge. So you got to free the front with tissue work and stretching and educate the back to put your scapula in a proper position. This is a simplistic model. There's more things to do, but some of the main things to do, the big rocks to get handled, are free the front, educate the back, and in the hip flexors and all the things that are the adductors, the anterior kind of adductors and hip flexors and rectus femoris and quads, all the stuff in the front needs to be freed up, softened up with massage, lengthened with range of motion training, and you need to educate the back, the glutes and the hamstrings, to be able to pull the femur into the socket so it's in a better position and it'll have more clearance. So that's what we talk about in all the videos: targeted tissue work, range of motion training, and posture. You can't just, my shoulder's impinged, I'm going to do this, now it doesn't impinge, but I'm going to go and sit at my desk all day like this, because then your physical structure will actually morph into that shape over time, and then it won't be as simple as just, try to think about being in a better posture and you won't have impingement. Try to think about being in a posterior pelvic tilt and you won't have hip impingement. You've got to morph your body in the other direction, which takes time, frankly. Your body doesn't just remodel and remold itself. It takes time. But that's the solution. Free up the tissue, increase the range of motion of your pecs and your anterior delts in the case of shoulder impingement, or free up the range of motion of your quads, your adductors, your glutes, your hamstrings even those are on the back side. That's why it's a little more complicated than this simplistic free the front, educate the back, but this is the big stuff. And that will do a lot to clear up your hip impingement or your shoulder impingement. But I wanted to illustrate that point because that fear of like, I just don't understand, what's going on in the hip, and how can the doctors so conclusively think that the bones are the determining factor and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, one of the things is a lot of people have tried freeing the front, educating the back, or in the case of the hip, they've tried freeing the front in terms of like stretching their hip flexors and doing some glute reactivation exercises, and it didn't work. So they say, I've tried that, it didn't work. My conclusion is non-surgical methods don't work. Unfortunately, the devil's in the details, meaning it's how you're stretching, it's are you doing tissue work, it's what type of tissue work you're doing. If all you've tried is foam rolling your quads and you've never got into the nitty-gritty details of your psoas, your iliacus, your adductor attachment points, your rectus femoris attachment points, all that stuff, if you've never got into the deep hip rotators, that affects hip range of motion. So you've tried something, maybe that you read online, maybe that you saw in physical therapy, or a trainer at a gym showed you, but that's just scratching the surface. There's so much more, and I had to spend 2, 3, 4 years inventing strange, weird tools. I had people weld me these strange tools to get into some of these areas. And you don't have to have that specific tool. You can get away with, lacrosse balls and barbells and kettlebells and things like that, but you do have to get in there a little bit more. Just like if you have shoulder impingement and your posture is like this, you've got to totally revamp the way you're living your life. If you're working like this at a desk all the time, you've got to work on your thoracic spine and your ribs, which there's exercises for each one of those things. So my point is, it's multifactorial, but you can do things by working on your posture, your tissue quality, and your range of motion. So if you're in the fear of the unknown, if it seems like it's a bone problem, look at the shoulder. There's things that people do for their shoulder when they have bad bones in the shoulder. There's things that you can do in the hip when you have bad bones in the hip. So hope you enjoyed that. Let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you soon.